Yesterday afternoon, I attended a workshop, the poetry workshop, for a while, and I've been thinking about it pretty much ever since, because Tim used one word and explored one word that I hadn't thought about in years, if ever, and the word was reverence. And I was thinking this morning, that I don't have a church, haven't had a church, wouldn't go to a church that would have me. And I hadn't been to church until last night and yesterday afternoon. And the reverence that I felt last night as the men were talking impressed upon me how lonely I've been and how small my world has become the last year and a half or so since my heart attack, because I haven't gone to church. I took a year off, a whole year off, to rest and recuperate and regenerate and rebuild, and this is really the first time. I've been out a couple of times for a couple of talks and stuff in the last few months, but I haven't done anything like this since my heart attack. And the reverence that I was experiencing last night, coming from everybody, I thought, man, I gotta go to church more often. So thank you for having me here at your church and my church, and so I'm gonna, tell you a little bit about back when I first started giving workshops and lectures and talks and stuff. I was so new at it in a way. I mean, I'd been teaching college for 12 years before, but when I first started, I would give a talk without hesitation. I'd give a talk on what I was interested in at the time, what I was feeling at the time, what I was struggling with at the time. And then my books, thank God, sort of started selling. And then, thank the devil, I would start giving talks based on what people asked me to talk about. And that led me to a heart attack. I'm sure that was one contributing factor. Is I would be wanting to talk on something, and somebody would say, "Oh yeah, but we hired you to talk on anger today, and that's what we want." And so I would swallow whatever I was thinking about or interested in. And I long for those days, like when I started, where I would talk and try to explore what I was feeling and thinking about a subject. And now, what I'm going to do today is a little bit different, because in the afternoon, I am going to give a workshop, a couple of hours on the passivity material. So I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I worked real hard on the last couple of years on this book on passivity, and I'd like to share some stuff with some of you guys who are not too passive to come to the workshop. I was going to write on apathy, but I thought, what the fuck? Needed just a little comic relief after all those poems, right? Makes me even want to tell a joke, but I won't. So anyway, but this morning, after my heart attack, and the loss of one of my dearest friends to cancer this year, Dan Jones, who some of you may remember from The Flying Boy, I talked about. He and I had been partners and friends and for 25 years. And moving from Mentone and a couple of other things, I had enough time to sit around and begin, and I want to really emphasize begin, to think about and feel about and question the difference between depression and I realized that I had wrestled, as many of you know, or some of you know, wrestled with depression most of my life. In and out, up and down, medication, emotional release work, tons of psychotherapy. I bought one therapist a place on the lake, just by myself. But after my heart attack and during this time off, I realized that while there's many forms of depression, many books on depression, which mostly I've read, trying to deal with my own and my clients, you know, that there was nothing on despair. There's nothing on despair, really. No books, no treatment programs, and no medication, nor should there be. So what I thought, I would just share with you some very initial thinking that I haven't shared with anybody before, and do what I used to love doing, and that is talk about something that I'm working with and exploring right now as we speak, instead of writing a book about it and coming back in 2 years and telling you that, if that's okay. Okay? All right. So I won't take very long here. I'll have a short amount of time, but part of that time I want to give to you about despair. I'll tell you about mine, you tell me about yours. And maybe, if we have time, we'll tell each other about and how. And I've got some questions that I wrote down in the bed this morning, not a year ago, but this morning, that I'll ask that may or may not be relevant to exploring this subject of difference between despair and depression. But let me give you just an initial thought or two. And also, if we have time, I'm going to give a couple of possible solutions to despair. I say possible.
Beyond, different than suicide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But we're not going to rule that out. Nor homicide, if you interrupt me very much.
I'm going to come closer. At least out of Washington.
It's just a different form of reverence.
No promises.
Despair is a disappointment, a feeling of being punished, a fall from a high place to one lower, whereas depression has no high place to fall from. So I'm just going to say that again for what it's worth. I just wrote this morning. I mean, it's not a poem or anything. It's just a statement that I'm just kind of sketching out here. Despair is a disappointment, a feeling of being punished, a fall from a high place to a lower one, whereas depression has no high place to fall from. Okay? Another thing that I was thinking is depression, as many of you know. Now, I want to be very clear here. I really believe depression is a valid diagnosis. I really believe that some depression is biochemical and can be treated with pharmacology. I believe that. About 80% of depression is untreatable by current pharmacological knowledge and methods, because about 80% of people's depression comes through repressed emotions that have been stagnant for so long that it takes the form of depression. And when those emotions are felt and released in a safe environment again and again and again and again, that kind of depression tends to abate and get some relief from. I don't know which kind you have, if you have either, but I just want you to know that I take it very seriously as a clinical problem, okay? Despair is the thing that I was thinking about in writing this morning is the dissonance or the distance between what we thought we would become and what we became. Who we thought we would be and who we ended up being. What we thought we would do and what we have actually done. And in that space, between those two places, is where my despair has been active, lying loose, calling for attention, but in my passivity, which I'll go into this afternoon because they're related, in my passivity, I paid far less attention to my despair than I did my depression. So I'm going to say that again, if I can. I just sort of made it up this morning, so I don't know exactly. But despair is the dissonance or the distance between what we thought we would be and what we became. Who we thought we were and who we really are. What we thought we would contribute to this world and what we actually contributed. Does that make sense? So this is the audience participation portion of the program now. Is, what do you think about what I've said so far? Yes?
I think when you address the despair, the depression will begin to clear. That the
especially if it's emotional and situational versus purely biochemical.
well, that can get really confusing because what's to say emotion does not affect the biochemical?
Yeah, that's true. Right.
Or vice versa.
Right.
So, I see despair often as sort of like the gateway on a precipice. That who you really are when you take the step and say yes.
Mm-hmm.
That my despair is if I'm saying, oh, not this, oh, not this. It's what I think I want something different than what's really happening. And so that creates the dissonance. And in that is all the emotional repercussions of whatever label you put on that. But when I address the despair, when I say yes to my life, yes, this is really my life, this is really happening, then the demons of depression or whatever have no validity. There's nothing for them to hang on. There's no ground for them to walk on.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. Wonderfully said. Yes, sir.
What's come up with me is that my sense is that the avoidance of sadness leads to despair.
That's right. I think so too. So I'm gonna give you a model that I've worked on about how to deal with the sadness and some of the despair in just a few minutes. I'm gonna just kind of share that with you too if we have time. But I think you're exactly right. Yes, sir.
What came to my mind when I heard the word despair was, for me, I often feel just a tremendous weight of injustice in the world, the ugliness, the humanity, all the people that are suffering, all the sadness, my privilege that that's not happening to me. And I actually, in a psychotherapy session within the last month, I'm thinking, well, you defined it personally. I'm thinking this big cosmic thing, but somehow I'm feeling it personally. But it's also a discrepancy, because I think in the kind of, Fantasyland, Walt Disney, small town Protestant childhood I had, we were kind of taught that the world was a lot nicer than it is. We were more protective of our children. And so the discrepancy between that idea of what you would like and your longing and your ideals, and I actually had it brought to me in psychotherapy that part of my current malaise was also partially that despair, not just issues that we think properly of myself. Just interesting how those two things go.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I kind of remember when I was like 7 years old and I woke up, and everything up until that point, it's exactly like you said, like, this isn't going to work out. And it was like my first communion. So I remember the light coming through the window. It was like 1959, May 9th. And I just wasn't going to listen to anybody anymore. I knew it. And even now I look back at pictures of that day with my sister, and there's something changed in me. And, at that point, that's where the life of addictions and avoidance and all this stuff, and I really was, in some sense, casting myself over a cliff, emotionally.
It's a funny thing. I mean, we've been doing this for over 25 years. And really, I know I haven't been lately, but I've been to or taught at, 100, 150 conferences, 200, but I just never really heard anybody talk about despair that much that I can remember. And yet, last night as I was reverentially listening to you talk, I could hear the despair, And I thought, why haven't I really thought about this before? And I just want to say, part of it is I was so focused on depression, and so I want to keep listening. Yes, sir.
Despair is my secret. That's what I'm talking about.
Despair is my secret. Wow.
So, John, you spoke of personal despair of what you could be, and then that gap is all what you are. But where you're speaking, I'm hearing and I'm thinking of that despair of situations of the world that we find ourselves, our disillusions and disappointments of the world. Those are two different things.
Yeah, and they're intimately related, and one can't escape the other. If you look at one, you're going kind of like what he was saying back there. You're going to have to look at the other. One of the things that I'm going to talk about this afternoon in passivity is sort of that too. Is there's the interpersonal passivity, and then there's the cultural passivity that we're experiencing, and it's the same thing. There's interpersonal despair and the cultural and social and societal despair that run together too. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the second thing you said about despair, being the dissonance and the distance, really kind of killed me. Thank you. And in that respect, maybe homicide is a form of reverence. It reminded me of a question that came to me, and I don't remember the source of the question. Would the boy you were be proud of the man you are?
Would the boy you were be proud of the man you are? He said. Yes, sir, that's good.
I also want to thank you, John, because you just gave me almost an epiphany. I've been involved with the project away from my family for the last few years. My wife, I live on the West Coast and my work is on the East Coast, and I'm gone so much. And this project feeds me, but my wife has been, from my perspective, depressed. However, I now believe, thanks to you, that she's in despair because she's not living in this relationship with this man that she loves, that she wants to live as we grow older together. And so I can look at her without saying, gee, I wish she'd get some help. I wish she'd go get some medications and deal with her depression, when in fact, she's feeling despair. Thank you for that.
Man, that's worth a trip right there. Because this is my commitment to the next few years, is to really give some voice to these folks who are being treated as if they're depressed or being treated for depression. And they wake up and go, what's wrong with me? This is not working. This medication doesn't work. I did this therapy and it doesn't work. What's wrong with me? You know, I listen to the TV and my doctor, and they say they treat their other patients and it works for them. Why doesn't it work for me? And it's just a small part of the answer, but this is one for some people is because you're in despair.
And I'm getting angry at her. Yeah. Because she's so pissed off or depressed. Right. And I'm getting resentful, and in reality, of course she feels despair. We love each other, and I'm not there.
Yeah, of course she feels despair. A couple more, and then I'm going to give you some sentences. I didn't mean for this to get away from me back there, and then. But where? Somebody just stand up and talk. God damn it! Okay. Hey, go. All right. All right, the three men that are standing up, just keep standing. You go, and you go. Okay? All right. Go.
Soul sickness. The other thing is you mentioned, right at the beginning, hadn't been to church, but last night was good. You're always in the pressure seat in the front. When's the last time you came to a conference and sat in the back?
1927.
I wonder if in some regard, because of all the crap you deal with, not only personal but other people's shit, if there's not an addiction to despair.
That's a good question. Great question.
As you were talking, and I realized despair or any struggle we have, it's the resistance and the opportunity to change the relationship with the experience and with ourselves. Because when you can change the relation you have with whatever, then you can rise above and learn from it.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
There are two big themes in this conference that I've been carrying for years. One is grandiosity and another is dumpla, an idea that Malidoma brought here. And as soon as you started talking, that despair kind of linked up with them like a chemical bond. It felt like that if your grandiosity is crushed in a way that you edit the text of your life so that your soul is no longer in it, then you're in a state of despair the rest of your life. And that fits for me.
Wonderfully said. Wonderfully said. Yes, sir. One or two more.
I'm a little confused about what you said.
Me too.
Suppose you actually become what you set out for, and then the external world changes the game. Your job is outsourced. Technology makes your job disappear. And you feel a tremendous amount of despair. I mean, I feel like I'm being punished, like it's a disappointment to fall from a high place, and yet, in a sense, I have nothing to do with it. What is that?
Yeah, that's part of the thing that I don't understand either. I mean, again, I just want to keep re-emphasizing, I'm just exploring it as you are right now. Yes, sir, huh?
2 words with question mark.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know you were standing there. Go ahead, bud. Your turn.
I'm going to throw out there, shame.
What's that?
Shame.
Yeah. Shame, he's saying.
Oh,
Shame.
Yeah.
Your definition of despair is the same definition for me as shame.
and so give me a definition of shame. What?
Well, having the expectation that I walk in the world in a particular way and having discovered that that's not the way it is. And everything that goes into that, and shame of not being able to stand the way you can.
I think that shame is a response to despair. I think that shame is a possible response to despair, but I think they're two different things.
Well, that's great. Yes, sir.
With question mark, giving up, hopelessness, and then the final something came up, the loss of a higher power. Because you're talking about reverence and acknowledgement.
Yeah, I'm scared to death that part of the approach that must be taken to despair is going to be a deeper spiritual connection and path, and I'm looking forward to dealing with.
I'm sure you will.
For me, basically, you have to reclaim a connection to a place where you feel safety. And for most of us, that very intimate place is where the soul resides, And so basically, for years I've been working with young guys, and one of the things what's come up over the years is what we call sanctuary. What is reclaiming sanctuary? And so the way I look at it, one of the ways of looking at it is basically wherever your soul resides, there is sanctuary. And almost all of us have that sanctuary. In almost all of us, that sanctuary has been trespassed by some form or another, by parents, by culture, by anything, And so when we need to go to our sanctuary, there is no safety there because there's a violation of that sanctuary. So you have to reclaim that sanctuary. So to me, that last night you were reclaiming sanctuary,
And that's kind of what I felt. Yeah, exactly. So here's what I'm going to do, because several of you still want to talk. I have about 10 more minutes, and what I would rather do is have you take that than me, if you would like to. And what I'd like for you to do, if you're willing, is to pair up and answer. Take turns answering these questions. Each person will get about 5 minutes. And if you want to go some other direction than the questions that I'm given here, feel free to do so. But if you'll just stay with it for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and maybe go to a break or something. Yeah. And so let me just give you the questions, and then I'm going to ask you to pair up for 10 minutes. And then if you don't want to do that, you can just kind of hang out, and then we'll come back in here, and they'll wind us up and lead us into our morning break. Okay? So here's one question that you might want to answer. Okay? What do you despair about today? Today, that there's still, based on the loose definitions I've given and what people have said, what do you still despair about today? So that's one question you can answer with your partner, okay? The second question is, what did you once feel despair about, but you no longer do? Okay, that's the second possible question. What did you once feel maybe deeply in despair about, but you no longer do? Okay? And then the third question is, how do you, or did you, move out of despair? How did you, or how do you? So this is basically sort of a question and answer thing for each other. And